Hi there, I'm Brother Merrill, and this is Sunshine for the Soul Inspirational Stories. I certainly appreciate you watching. I appreciate all the listeners that send me their stories. I would encourage anyone that has a story that they think might help others feel closer to the Lord to please share it. You can do it in the comment section, or there's an email listed in the first comment after most of my videos. The Lord does play an active role in each of our lives, and many of us have inspirational experiences that will allow us to become closer to Him and to know His voice and feel His Spirit and His approval of our lives. Thank you for sharing them. I also want to thank Cardio Miracle. This week I had several sleepless nights over a situation, and it was nice to be able to have something that allowed me to function and feel normal during the day. It's not a stimulant. It helps the blood flow and your neural pathways open, and your whole system just seems to function more beautifully, like it did when I was 30. My wife and I and many of the listeners now have shared their experiences with me. It's a great product. I'll leave a link for Cardio Miracle in the first comment. I'd encourage you to try it. It's great. I have several great stories today about encounters with the three Nephites. They are inspiring, and I think they give us some insight as to how these messengers of the Lord interact in our lives. In the early 1830s, out of curiosity, Benjamin Brown visited an LDS meeting and witnessed the gift of tongues manifest. Although this experience was inspirational, he did not join the church at that time, and for a time he treated his experience lightly, though he didn't completely dismiss it. Sensing there was truth there, he obtained a Book of Mormon and began reading it. When he read that the three Nephites could show themselves unto whatsoever man it seemeth them good, he recorded, I asked the Lord to allow me to see them as a witness and testimony of the Book of Mormon. I then covenanted with him, if he complied with my request, I would preach this truth for the remainder of my days, even at the peril and expense of my life. The Lord heard my prayer, and 5 days afterward, 2 of the 3 Nephites visited me in my bedroom. I did not see them come into the room, but suddenly found them there with me. One of them spoke to me for some time and reproved me sharply for treating so lightly the gift of tongues I had witnessed at the meeting with the saints. He admonished me, saying that as long as I lived, to never do so again, for I had grieved the Spirit of the Lord, by whose power that gift had been given. I have never in my life, before or since, received such a rebuke. I hope never to receive another. It had such power it cut to my core. I was dumb before my rebuker, for I knew that what he said was right, and I was deserving of it. I recognized by the Spirit that accompanied him that he was speaking in the Nephite language, but I understood every word plainly. I also recognized that this was the same language I had heard Father Fisher speak at the meeting when I had witnessed the gift of tongues manifested. As I considered the power of his words, suddenly both of them were gone. How these men went, I do not know, but they were gone. At that moment, the Spirit of the Lord said to me, now you know for yourself. You have seen and heard. I knew then that the Book of Mormon was true, that Joseph Smith was a prophet, and that this was the work of the Lord. Afterward, Benjamin was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He and his wife attended the dedication of the Kirtland Temple. He was later sent on several missions, and while proselyting in Portland, Ohio, he converted a young man named Jesse W. Crosby, who Benjamin had the privilege of performing a miraculous healing for. One day, while young Jesse was cutting timber with his brother, the wind dislodged a huge branch perhaps 12 or 14 inches in diameter, from high in a tree. It struck Jesse with such force that it crushed his skull, injured his neck and his shoulders. So his brother carried him home, and his father immediately sent for a doctor. Upon examining Jesse's crushed skull, the doctor told the family and the gathering neighbors that this was a desperate case. He said if he could determine that the brain was unharmed, he could then remove the crushed portion of Jesse's skull and replace it with a silver plate to protect his brain. If everything went well, Jesse may live, but he would only make a partial recovery. As the doctor started to cut into Jesse's head to determine the state of his brain, Jesse's mother stopped him. She and her sons had joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and she insisted that the missionaries should first administer to her son. Her husband and the Gentile neighbors who had gathered scoffed at her suggestion, but Jesse's mother insisted. She sent Jesse's brother to retrieve Benjamin Brown, who was then proselyting about 8 miles away. When they returned, a huge crowd had gathered in and around the house. Benjamin had received an assurance through the Spirit of the Lord that Jesse would recover. But when he saw Jesse lying on the bed, there was no sign of life, and the crowd of onlookers and unbelievers sneered. "Here comes the Mormon. Now we'll see whether he can heal or not." Benjamin quietly cleared the house of everyone but the family. Then he administered to the lifeless body. Jesse immediately awoke and assured his mother and his family that he would make a full recovery, after which he closed his eyes and fell into a peaceful sleep. By morning, Jesse was feeling much better and had a hearty breakfast. 4 days later, he returned to work in the woods, hauling timber with his brother. And I'll bet the boys kept an eye up into the trees when the wind blew after that. Jesse later served several missions for the church. I thought this story was so interesting because Benjamin Brown humbly accepted the rebuke of this Nephite messenger. Then he changed his life's course and faithfully followed the covenant path for the rest of his life. This miraculous healing testifies of Benjamin Brown's obedience to his commitment after the rebuke of one of the 3 Nephites. I have another great experience with one of the 3 Nephites. In 1904, Apostle John W. Taylor presided at a conference in Bountiful, Utah. As he bore testimony of the principles of the gospel, he stated that 1/2 of the people, under the sound of his voice that day, would apostatize from some of the principles of the gospel. Then, as a witness of the truth of this prediction, he stated that one of the 3 Nephites would visit a home in their settlement that week, and in consequence of his visit, some person would receive a great blessing. Brother John E. Fisher recounts, "When I was a boy of 9 years of age, I witnessed the following. My mother had but little voice and could only speak in a subdued whisper during much of her life. Numerous medical treatments for her condition had provided no solution. My great-grandmother lived with us at the time in our bountiful home. She was 88 years of age, and despite the many failed medical and priesthood administrations to resolve mother's issue, great-grandmother continued to pray that mother would get her voice back again. One day I was playing at the side of our house when I noticed an elderly gentleman approaching our home. He spoke to me in a voice that was most angelic, asking if he could talk with my mother. I quickly ran in the side door and told my mother that a sweet old gentleman wanted to see her at the front door. Just then he knocked. At that very moment, my mother had the impression he was a Nephite. Then she thought she should quickly let him in or he would be gone. So she hurriedly opened the front door, and upon her whispered invitation he entered. He was of medium height, light in complexion, with gray hair and impressive eyes. He looked at mother and said, "I have come to bless you." Mother assured him that she was blessed and needed no blessing that she did not already have, all this time whispering near his ear to make herself heard. She had come to accept her condition. She had been administered to by the priesthood and multiple physicians, all to no avail. The thought of overcoming her affliction seemed impossible to her. The stranger gently insisted, "You have need of a blessing you're not aware of." In a faint whisper, Mother asked him who he was. He replied, "I'm a fellow saint." Then she asked where he was from. He said, "Away down south." I shall never forget his sweet, calm voice and the peaceful smile that illuminated his countenance. His gentle confidence caused Mother to remember her first impression. This was one of the three Nephites, and she suddenly began to doubt her own faith. To delay her test of faith, she asked the stranger if he would like something to eat, and he said, "Yes, sister, if it's not too much trouble." So she prepared a quick lunch for him, and as he ate, she went into our pantry and knelt in prayer, praying for faith before allowing him to place his hands upon her head. As she knelt in the pantry and prayed, the feeling came to her that everything was all right. She would discern his influence as soon as he laid his hands upon her head. After finishing a hearty lunch, our visitor placed a chair in the middle of the room and asked my mother to be seated. He stood behind the chair, laid his hands upon her head, and said, "Sister, the prayer I pray, no earthly ears may hear." Then he said, "O God, the Eternal Father," and then remained silent for a minute or so before saying, "Amen." After his blessing, Mother visited with him. He told us that he had traveled the whole earth over, administering and bringing comfort to the saints in need. He told us many other things of interest to our family, our people, and our church, and causes of certain atmospheric conditions, stating in effect that the full choiceness of this land was being withheld because the people of the world would take it away from us if this land were permitted to blossom in its fullness. This was God's way of protecting this land for his work and his people. He spent an hour or so with us. Then, as he prepared to leave, he asked God to bless us, our home, and surroundings. Placing his hands upon my head and the other children, he said to my mother, "These are tokens of God's love, entrusted for a time to your care." Mother and I followed this brother out onto our front porch and watched him depart. He went for about 100 steps or so, and then disappeared right before our eyes in the middle of an open road. At that moment, Mother turned pale and leaned against the house for support. In a rich, full voice, she looked at me and asked if I had seen what had just happened. Before answering her, I called her attention to the fact that she had just spoken to me in a normal voice, and this only added to her amazement. While this visitor had been with us, a gentle shower had fallen in the vicinity of our home. We followed his footprints in the moisture on the dirt road, and they led right to the spot where he had disappeared, but no further. We then asked our neighbors if they had seen him, but no one else had seen him before or after he left our home. When we went back into the house, my great-grandmother, who had been quietly rocking all the while in an adjoining room, observing everything through an open door, said, "I have lived to be 88 years of age, and this day I have had the privilege of seeing a Nephite." We felt a reverent amazement after our visitor had departed. He had blessed our home and healed Mother's condition. In relating our experience later to our neighbors, we were informed that on the previous Sunday, in conference, Apostle John W. Taylor had spoken with much spirit and had borne a fervent testimony, and then prophesied that before the week was over, one of the three Nephites would visit a home in East Bountiful and leave a blessing, and this would serve as a testimony of his witness and that the message he had declared was true. After recounting this experience, John Fisher then signed this declaration. I bear testimony and am a witness that the above is a brief account of the truth as I know it to be the truth. I pray it may help others, as not a few of us have had such visitations. Signed, John E. Fisher. This account has such a sweet spirit of truth with it. It is unusual that Sister Fisher was made aware that he was one of the 3 Nephites before her encounter with him began. It seems this realization usually comes after the test of those being visited. But somehow this prior manifestation, perhaps because of priesthood assignment to him, expanded his visit as he performed this healing and allowed him to share his knowledge and insights with power and authority. This account sheds light on the 3 Nephites' interactions with mankind in our time. Another encounter with one of the 3 Nephites was Mary Wells Whitney. She recorded, one afternoon, after hearing the doorbell ring, I went to the door and opened it. There stood an elderly man with white hair and beard, neatly dressed, straight as an arrow and altogether respectable in appearance and manner. He gently asked if I could help him. I told him I had no money, then added if he needed food, I would gladly share some with him. He answered, I would be most grateful. His answer surprised me somewhat. I was very much occupied with work around our home, so I showed him into the kitchen, spread what food I had before him, and left him sitting at the table. My little boys were playing there at the time, and I told them to stay with the stranger and wait on him. I paid him little attention while I returned to my work. A short while later, I heard the clatter of feet, and here came my boys, breathless and excited, and the oldest exclaimed, Mama, I'll bet that was one of the 3 Nephites. I asked, what makes you think that? My younger son then spoke up. He had been suffering from a toothache all day. He said, I was holding my face, and the man said, Son, what's troubling you? I told him, I've got a toothache. Then he said, it will ache no more. And Mama, it stopped aching right then and hasn't ached since. The boys then told me that when the stranger departed, he said, Peace be unto you and your house, and walked out the door. They related how they had rushed out right after him and looked up and down the street and through the backyard, but they couldn't see him anywhere. My youngest son said, Mama, I even looked in the furnace room, and he wasn't there. I enjoyed this experience. Sister Whitney was so busy she didn't recognize who was in her home, but her children felt his spirit and recognized it. As we move about accomplishing the many tasks of our busy lives, I feel we have more encounters with heavenly beings than we know. Clarissa Young Spencer, daughter of Brigham Young, had an interesting encounter while going to school in Provo. Children in polygamous marriages referred to the other wives of their father as aunts. Clarissa records, Annalise's home in Provo stood on the northeast corner of one of the main streets. The front of the house faced east. Just across the street on the north stood the Provo Tabernacle. Aunt Eliza's lot was entirely surrounded by a picket fence with a gate that opened onto the main street and a path from the gate to the front door on the east side of the home. On the north side of her home was a large porch in front of a dining room. This room was where we usually sat, but we always kept the door from the dining room to the north porch locked. This kept as much of the cold out as possible, giving us full benefit of the stove's heat in that room. This is where we studied and practically lived. This particular winter had been very cold, and there was a great deal of snow on the ground. A young man from Alpine, Johnny Walton, boarded with us. He worked for his board and went to Brother Mazur's school. It had snowed heavily that morning for several hours, but it had cleared up, and the sun was shining when I returned from school that afternoon. I had to break tracks from the east gate to the door through 6 or 7 inches of freshly fallen snow as I came up the path. Johnny was still at school, so the path was not cleared to the front door. Aunt Eliza and I were alone, sitting by the fire in the dining room, when a gentle knock came on the north door. We were surprised, as no one ever came to that door. Aunt Eliza motioned me to answer the door. I got up and glanced at our big watchdog laying on the floor beside me. I unlocked the door and opened it, and there stood a rather tall man, wearing a straw hat, a blue jacket, and spotless blue overalls. He asked, "Will you give me something to eat?" I turned to Aunt Eliza and repeated his question, as he had spoken in a low voice. She cheerfully invited him to come in and sit down, which he did, placing his hat on the windowsill. We spread a tablecloth and set out a lunch of cold meat, applesauce, good homemade bread, butter, and a pitcher of milk. The stranger sat at the table while we went back to the other side of the room, Aunt Eliza to her knitting and me to my books. The dog raised his head and looked at the stranger peacefully, and then dozed off. This was unusual for this dog to do, for as a rule he was not friendly to strangers. After a short time the stranger arose, thanked us, picked up his hat, and departed quietly, closing the north door behind him. As he left, I felt there was something unusual about the man, so I jumped up and ran to the window to have a peek at him. As I passed the table, I glanced down and remembered distinctly saying breathlessly, "Aunt Eliza, he hasn't eaten anything at all." The food was untouched, aside from a small piece of broken bread. I guess Aunt Eliza wasn't much of a cook. She said I immediately ran and opened the door, but the stranger was nowhere in sight, and there was not a sign of footprints in the deep snow. As I ran around to the east side of the house and the front gate, I looked up and down the street, but he had completely disappeared. I came back into the house wondering who he was, where he had come from, and where he had gone. It seemed only after he left I came to feel he was not from our realm. The serene, peaceful expression on his face will remain with me always. Later we made inquiries of our neighbors, but none of them had seen or heard of him. When Father Brigham returned, Aunt Eliza related our experience with the stranger and asked, "President Young, what do you think it means?" Father sat for some time, twirling his thumbs as was his habit when he was thinking seriously. I was standing closely beside him with his arm around me, waiting anxiously for his reply. He drew me closer to him, then said very seriously and very quietly, "I believe this house has been visited by one of the 3 Nephites." He paused a moment and then said, "We will all kneel and have our evening prayers. A picture will remain in my memory of that peaceful home in Provo, the great big comfortable house, the kindness and thoughtfulness of Aunt Eliza, and the unbroken snow surrounding her home on the day of the memorable visit from this stranger and his beautiful influence. All this has remained clearly with me since that wintry day." I thought all of these encounters really gave some clarification as to how we sometimes have contact with individuals from the other side. And quite often one of them could be one of the 3 Nephites or another translated being. The Lord loves us. He is aware of our needs. Sometimes we just need a little boost in spirit. Other times we need physical assistance. And then at times we are tested. And as Paul said, some of us may have entertained angels unaware. But I do know the Lord loves us. If you doubt that, I would ask you to please ponder your life. Think about what you want to accomplish with your time on earth. Think about the things that the Lord has placed in your life. And if you don't believe in God, or if you wonder about his existence, think about the many things that you have that bring joy to your life, that make your life easier. Think about where you are in your life and feel gratitude. And then if you would kneel down and sincerely and verbally ask, God, do you love me? I promise you that you will feel the Lord's love pour into your heart and into your mind. And you will know that God is there. He's aware of you. He loves you. Wherever you are in life, whatever you've done, Jesus Christ has allowed a way for us to return to our loving Heavenly Father if we will reach out to him as he knocks. I know that our Savior Jesus Christ and his Father and our Father love us each dearly. Again, I would recommend all of you take a look at Cardio Miracle. You'll enjoy it. I appreciate you watching today. You can subscribe here. And if you enjoyed this story, here's another episode with 3 Nephite encounters. And you can watch all of Sunshine for the Soul, inspirational stories right here. Thank you.